Some choices don't announce themselves with thunder or lightning. They arrive in silence, hidden in shadows, bleeding. Into the dirt behind your barn, Kalen Merritt had owned his small piece of frontier land for 7 years, raised 3 mules from FO, and never once found another human being on his property until the morning he walked out to check the water trough and saw the blood trail leading into the old grain shed, fresh blood, still wet, and 2 sets of footprints, both small, both dragging. He stood there with his hand on the shed door, knowing that whatever was on the other side would demand something from him. What he didn't know was that before the sunset that day, he would lose everything he owned, and that an army would arrive at his door looking for exactly what he just found. Kalen pushed. The door opened slowly. The hinges screamed. In the corner, pressed against the far wall like cornered animals, 2 young women stared back at him. Apache, both wore traditional clothing torn and stained dark. The older one held a piece of broken wood like a weapon, her arm shaking from either exhaustion or injury. The younger one couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, her face pale beneath brown skin, eyes wide with terror that went beyond simple fear. She was hurt bad. Kalen could see that immediately. He raised both hands, palms out, took 1 step back toward the door to show he wasn't trapping them. The older woman said something sharp in her language, pulled her sister closer. Kalen noticed the older one's shoulder, then the fabric there was soaked through, the blood still flowing, not a graze, not a scratch, something had gone deep. How long have you been here? He thought. And who did this? He spoke slowly. Are you hurt? The obvious question, but he needed to say something. The older woman's eyes narrowed. She understood English. Good. That would help. Maybe you tried again. I'm not going to hurt you. You're bleeding. Both of you need help. The younger one swayed, her legs buckling. The older woman caught her barely, and Ken saw her wheeze as the weight hit her injured shoulder. They were both going to collapse if they didn't get attention soon, but they wouldn't accept it, not from him, not yet. Then he heard it. Horses, multiple horses, still distant, but moving fast, coming from the eastern trail, the same direction the blood trail had come from. Ken looked back at the 2 women and saw their faces change. That wasn't rescue in their eyes. That was pure terror. They weren't hiding from the Apache. They were hiding from whoever was coming. And whoever was coming was close enough now that Ken could hear the riders shouting to each other, spreading out, searching. The older woman gripped her sister tighter, and in that moment Ken understood something fundamental. These women had run as far as they could. They had nothing left, no strength, no options, no time. They were about to be found unless he did something in the next 60 seconds that would change all of their lives forever. Ken made the decision before he fully understood what it would cost him. He stepped back into the shed, grabbed a coil of rope from the wall, and pointed toward the back where a loose board had rotted through years ago. They could squeeze through there, get to the ravine behind his property. The older woman shook her head violently, said something harsh in Apache. She didn't trust him. Why would she? The voices outside grew louder, men calling to each other, spreading out across his land. Kalen heard one of them shout something about checking the buildings. Maybe 2 minutes now, maybe less. He looked at the younger sister. She was fading, eyes unfocused, skin too pale. Whatever wound she carried was draining her fast. You stay here, you die. Ken said, simple as that. You come with me right now. You might live. The older woman's jaw tightened. She was doing calculations in her head. Trust this stranger or face whoever was hunting them. Neither option was good, but one of them was certain death. She nodded once, sharp, decisive. Callan moved fast. He pulled the loose board free, widen the gap. The younger sister could barely stand. The older one tried to support her weight, but couldn't manage it with her own injury. Callan stepped forward, and the older woman flinched back, raised that piece of wood again. He stopped, pointed at her sister. She's not going to make it on her own. A long pause. Then the older woman lowered the wood. Let him help. Callan got under the younger sister's arm, took most of her weight. She was light, but completely limp. He could feel her shallow breathing against his shoulder. They pushed through the gap in The wall just as he heard boots hit the ground near his barn. Someone was already at the main shed door. The ravine wasn't far, maybe 30 yards of open ground, but 30 yards might as well have been 30 miles if you were carrying someone who couldn't run. The older woman went first, moving low and fast. Despite her injury, Ken followed with the younger sister, half carrying, half dragging her. Every step felt like it. Took an hour. Every sound behind them felt like discovery. They made it to the ravine edge, slid down the rocky slope. At the bottom was a narrow creek bed, mostly dry this time of year. Good cover, but no way out. The ravine ran east for maybe half a mile before it opened onto the flats. That was where they needed to go, where they needed to disappear, but they couldn't walk it. Not fast enough, not with their injuries. The older woman looked at him, said something in Apache. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Now what? You got us out of the shed. What's your plan for the rest? Ken didn't have one. Not yet, but he knew what they needed. Transportation, something fast enough to outrun horses if it came to that, something strong enough to carry 2 people across rough terrain. He only owned 3 mules. 2 were work animals, stubborn and slow. The third was Dusty, 7 years old, fastest and strongest mule he'd ever raised, worth more than everything else he owned combined. The animal he'd planned to sell next month to pay for winter supplies. Back at the shed, someone kicked the door open. A man's voice shouted, "They were here. Blood trail goes right through. Check the back." Ken looked at the 2 women, looked back toward his property. Then he made a choice that would leave him with nothing, but at least these 2 might live. "If you can ride," he said quietly, "I can get you something to ride on, but you need to stay here. Stay quiet. I'll be back." The older woman studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Kalen turned and climbed back up the ravine wall, moving toward his corral, where 3 mules stood, watching the commotion with mild interest. One of them was about to become someone else's lifeline, and his entire future was about to disappear into the desert with 2 strangers whose names he didn't even know. Ken reached the corral fence and vaulted over. The 2 work mules barely glanced at him, but Dusty raised her head, ears forward, sensing something different in his movements. She was smart, too smart. Sometimes she knew when things weren't normal. He grabbed her lead rope and bridle from the post, speaking low and steady as he approached. "Easy, girl. Need you to trust me here." Behind him, near the shed, he heard furniture breaking. They were tearing his property apart. Looking for the women. One voice rose above the others, rough, angry. "Where's the blood trail?" "Go, they didn't. Just walk off, find them." Kalen got the bridle on Dusty, led her toward the back fence, the fence that bordered the ravine. He needed to take her down the slope, get her to the women, and somehow get both of them mounted and moving before the searchers expanded their radius. Impossible, but he was doing it. Anyway, 3 men emerged from behind the barn. Not locals, not ranchers. They wore trail dust and hard miles, carried themselves like men who took things that didn't belong to them. The one in front had a scar across his jaw and eyes that had stopped seeing other people as human a long time ago. He spotted Callan with the mule. "You, where you going with that animal?" Ken kept moving. "Water run, you'll needs a drink." The scar man walked closer. "We're looking for 2 Apache girls hurt. Bleeding? You seen them?" "No." "You sure about that? Because their trail leads right to your property, and now you're acting strange, moving a valuable animal away from your barn." Callan stopped, turned to face them. "What do you want with 2 injured women?" The man smiled. It wasn't a good smile. "That's none of your concern. Where are they?" "They're not here. You searched my shed. You found nothing. Now get off my land." The scarred man took another step. His hand rested on the blade at his belt. "You know what I think? I think you're hiding something. I think maybe we need to search a bit more thoroughly, and maybe you need to answer questions more carefully." Ken's grip tightened on Dusty's lead rope. The mule sensed the tension, shifted her weight. From the ravine behind him, he heard the smallest sound, a pebble rolling, one of the women moving. The scarred man's eyes flicked past Kalen toward the ravine edge. The man started walking that direction. Kalen moved to block him. "You're not welcome here. Leave now or..." "What?" "Or nothing." Kalen had no leverage, no authority, no weapon in reach, just a mule and a stubborn refusal to let these men find what they were hunting. The Scar Man laughed, pushed past him, headed for the ravine. Kalen did the only thing he could think of. He swung onto Dusty's back, no saddle, just a rope. In determination, kicked her forward, rode directly at the man, forcing him to jump aside. Then he turned the mule toward the ravine slope. The angle was too steep. Dusty hesitated. Kalen urged her forward anyway. She trusted him. Even when he asked the impossible, they went down the slope in a controlled slide, hit the bottom hard. The two women were there, pressed against a ravine wall. Kalen pulled Dusty to a stop beside them. No time for explanations, no time for anything. The older woman understood immediately. She helped her sister up. Kalen pulled the younger one onto Dusty's back. Then the older one behind her, two people on one mule, too much weight for a long run, but enough for a short escape. Go east, follow the ravine until it opens, then head for the rock formations. 3M, stay off the trails. The older woman looked down at him. What about you? I'll buy you time. Above them on the ravine edge, the scarred man appeared with four others. They saw the women, saw the mule, started down the slope. Kalen slapped Dusty's flank hard. She bolted east down the ravine, carrying two strangers toward freedom, taking with her 7 years of work, 7 years of hope, everything Kalen had built. He watched her disappear around the bend. Then he turned to face 5 men who had no reason to let him live. And in the distance from the north, he heard something new, a sound that made his blood run cold. Dozens of horses coming, fast, coming from territory that belonged to people who didn't negotiate with strangers. The Apache had arrived. The scarred man hit the ravine floor first. His boots kicked up dust as he landed. Eyes locked on Kalen. Where'd they go? The question came out flat. Dangerous. Not really a question at all. Kalen backed up slowly, kept his hands visible, east, following the ravine. Maybe half a mile by now. The man gestured to 2 of his companions. Go. Run them down. We need those girls alive. The 2 men took off running, boots pounding the dry creek bed. The scar man stayed, watched Ken with the same expression a snake uses before it strikes. You just made a very expensive mistake. They're people, not cargo. The man laughed. You don't know anything. Those girls are property promised to a buyer 3 territories over, worth more money than you'll see in your entire pathetic life. And you just help them escape on your best animal. Kalen felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not ranchers, not settlers with a dispute, slavers, men who bought and sold human beings like livestock. He'd heard stories about them working the territories, taking Apache women and children when they could, selling them to mines, to wealthy buyers who wanted servants they could treat however they wanted. He never believed it was this organized, this brutal. How do you find them? Bought them from a corrupt agent. 2 weeks ago, they escaped during transport. Been tracking them since. The man stepped closer. We don't lose merchandise ever. And we sure don't let some dirt farmer with 3 mules interfere. Behind Ken, the other 2 men reached the ravine floor, 5 total now, all armed, all focused on him. The sound of Apache horses grew louder, close enough now that Kalen could hear individual hoof beatots, maybe 2 minutes away, maybe less. The scar man heard it, too. His expression changed. Apache. Perfect, just perfect. He looked at his men. We need to move now, but he didn't move. Instead, he pulled the blade from his belt, long, curved, designed for intimidation as much as damage. You cost us 2 expensive assets. You're going to tell us exactly where they're headed, every detail, or I'm going to leave you here bleeding for the Apache to find. Ken backed up until his shoulders hit the ravine wall. Nowhere left to go. I told you, east, following the ravine. That's all I know. Liar. The blade came up. Kalen saw his death in a man's eyes. Then the sound of horses became thunder. The entire ravine seemed to shake with it. The scarred man's head snapped toward the sound. At the ravine entrance, dust rose like a storm. Through it came riders, dozens of them. Apache warriors on horseback, moving in formation, surrounding the ravine exits. With practiced precision, At the front rode a man in ceremonial dress, older, weathered, wearing a headdress that marked him as someone important, a leader. His face was carved from stone. In fury, his eyes swept the ravine, took in the 5 slavers, took in Kalen. Pressed against the wall, took in the blood trail that led nowhere. The scarred man and his companions froze. You didn't run from Apache. You didn't fight them when outnumbered 20-1. You stood very still and hoped they had other priorities. The leader raised one hand. His warriors stopped. Perfect. Silence except for the sound of horses breathing. The leader's gaze settled on Callan, held there, studied him with an intensity that felt like being weighed on scales that had never shown mercy. Then the leader spoke, his voice carried across the ravine like wind across empty land. Where are my daughters? Ken's throat went dry. Daughters, the 2 women he'd just helped escape, the ones he'd given Dusty to, the ones who were now 3 miles away and getting farther every minute. He was standing in front of their father who commanded an army, their father who looked like he was deciding which pieces of Kalen to separate first. The scarred slaver tried to speak. We were just the Apache leader's eyes shifted to him. Just that. Look, nothing else. The slaver went silent, swallowed hard, took a step back. The leader looked at Kalen again, waited behind him. Every warrior sat perfectly still, weapons ready, faces impassive, waiting for orders, waiting to see what their leader would do to the man who might know where his daughters were, the man who might be responsible for hiding them, the man who was about to answer a question that could end with his body left in the sand as warning to others. Kalen's mind raced through options: lie, and these warriors would no, tell the truth, and admit he'd helped the daughters of an Apache leader escape. Neither path looked like survival, but standing silent wasn't an option either. The leader's hand rested on the weapon at his side, waiting. They went east, Kalen said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Following the ravine, I gave him my mule so they could move faster. The leader's expression didn't change. You helped them, yes. Why? Because they were hurt, because men were hunting them. Kalen gestured toward the slavers. These men? The scarred slaver stepped forward quickly. That's not true. We were searching for stolen property. This man interfered with legitimate. The leader's gaze shifted to him again. The slavers. Words died in his throat. Something about the leader's eyes made lies impossible, made breathing difficult. How were they hurt? The leader asked Ken. His tone was careful now, controlled, like a man holding something dangerous that might break free any moment. Shoulder wound on the older one. The younger one was worse, pale, weak, lost a lot of blood. The leader's jaw tightened, the only visible crack in his stone composure, when maybe an hour ago, hour and a half, they were hiding in my grain shed when I found them. The leader turned his horse slightly, spoke in Apache to his warriors. Several of them immediately rode east down the ravine fast, following the trail. Dusty would have left. The leader looked back at Ken. You gave them your animal, your property to help strangers. They needed help. Most men would have turned away or worse. The leader's eyes moved to the 5 slavers. They were pressed together. Now, realizing their situation had become considerably more complicated, you hunted my daughters, the scarred man. Tried once more. We had papers, legal claim. The leader held up one hand. The man went silent. Around the ravine, Apache warriors began to dismount, moving in closer, forming a tighter circle around the slavers. Their movements were casual, unhurried, but there was nothing casual about what was happening. This was a noose closing. You took my daughters, the leader said. His voice was quiet now, somehow more terrible in its quietness. Hurt them, chased them across empty land, drove them to hide in a stranger's shed, bleeding and terrified. We were just following orders. One of the other slavers blurted out. We didn't know they were anyone important. The leader's expression finally changed. His face became something ancient and cold. My daughters are not important because of who I am. They are important because they are human beings, because they are children who should never have to run from men like you. He dismounted. handed his reins to a nearby warrior, walked slowly toward the 5 slavers, every step deliberate, the scarred man's. Hand moved toward his blade. 3 Apache warriors had arrows knocked before his fingers touched the handle. He froze, raised his hand slowly. The leader stopped 5 feet from the slavers. "You will tell me everything. Who sold them to you? Where you were taking them? Who else is involved in this trade? You will tell me all of this, and if you lie, even once, I will know, will tell." "You nothing." The leader nodded as if he'd expected that answer, even wanted it. "Then you will stay here. My warriors will ensure you don't leave, and when my daughters are found safe, we will discuss what justice looks like for men who hunt children." He turned back to Ken. "You come with me. We're going to find my daughters, and you're going to pray they're alive, because if they're not, your good intentions won't save you from what happens next." 2 warriors flanked Kalen immediately, not hostile, not gentle either, just present, making it clear he wasn't being given a choice. The leader mounted his horse again. Kalen stood there in the ravine, surrounded by Apache warriors with slavers behind him and an uncertain fate ahead. The sun had passed its peak. The afternoon was bleeding toward evening before sunset. The leader had said his daughters needed to be found before sunset, and Ken had no idea if Dusty had gotten them far enough, if they'd stopped to rest, if the younger sister had survived the ride. All he knew was that he'd made a choice that morning, a choice that cost him everything he owned, and now he was going to discover whether that choice had been noble sacrifice or fatal mistake. They rode east in silence, Call on a borrowed horse, flanked by warriors who watched him like men watch something dangerous that might bolt. The leader rode ahead, his back straight, his eyes scanning the terrain. Every few minutes, one of his scouts would report back in Apache. The leader would nod, give new orders, keep moving. The ravine opened on a flats. After a mile, the landscape spread out in all directions, bare rock and scattered brush offering little cover. Kalen saw the tracks immediately, Dusty's prints clear in the dust. 2 people riding her, the depth of the hoof prints showing the extra weight. The tracks headed northeast toward a cluster of rock formations that rose from the earth like broken teeth. The leader saw them too, urged his horse faster. The entire group picked up speed. Kalen's borrowed mount kept pace, the warriors maintaining their positions around him. Not prisoners exactly, not free either, something in between. They covered the distance in minutes that felt like hours as they approached the rocks. Kalen saw movement, a figure emerging from between 2 large stones. The older sister, Ayana. She stood at the edge of the formation, one hand raised a shield, her eyes from the sun. Her injured shoulder was wrapped now with cloth torn from her dress. When she saw the riders approaching, her body tensed, ready to run again, ready to fight. Then she saw the leader, saw the headdress, saw his face. Her expression broke. The warrior stance collapsed into something raw and young and terrified. She called out in Apache, a single word that Kalen didn't understand, but recognized anyway. "Father." The leader was off his horse before it fully stopped. He closed the distance to his daughter in long strides. She met him halfway. When they embraced, Ayana's entire body shook, not crying, beyond crying, something deeper, the kind of relief that only comes after you've accepted you're going to die, and then discover you might live after all. The leader held her, spoke quietly in their language. His voice was gentle now. All the stone fury from earlier had transformed into something else, something that looked like a man barely holding himself together. After a moment, he pulled back, checked her shoulder wound, asked questions. She answered, gesturing toward the rocks, toward where his sister waited. The leader turned to his warriors, gave orders. 3 of them immediately dismounted, grabbed supplies from there. Packs, medicine, water, food. They moved toward the rocks. The leader followed. Ayana walked beside him, leaning against her father's shoulder. Kalen stayed mounted, uncertain. One of the warriors gestured for him to dismount and follow. Not a request. Between the rocks in a space barely wide enough for 2 people, The younger sister lay on a makeshift bed of blankets someone had cared for her, cleaned her wounds, made her comfortable. She was unconscious but breathing, alive. The leader knelt beside her, put his hand on her forehead, spoke her name softly. She didn't respond, but her breathing was steady. The warriors began treating her wounds properly, working with practiced efficiency. The leader stayed kneeling for a long time. Then he stood, turned to face Ken. His expression was unreadable. You did this. You gave him a way to escape. You sent them here. I told them to head for the rocks. Figured they'd have cover, water nearby. The leader studied him. They would have died in your shed or been recaptured by those men. Instead, they're here alive because a stranger chose to help them at great cost to himself. Kalen didn't know what to say to that. The leader stepped closer. What is your name? Kalen Merritt. Kalen Merritt. I am Nishoba. These are my daughters, Ayana and Ku. The leader's voice was formal now. Ceremonial. You saved their lives. There is no debt greater than this. From behind the rocks came a sound that made Kalen's heart jump, a familiar bray. Dusty emerged, still saddled with the rope bridle. Looking annoyed at being left waiting, Ayana appeared beside the mule. Holding her lead rope, she walked Dusty over to Ken, extended the rope toward him, said something in Apache. Her voice was quiet but firm. Nishoba. Translated. She says your animal carried them when they had nothing left. Save them when running would have ended in collapse. She says to thank you seems insufficient, but thank you is what she offers. Kalen took the rope, ran his hand along Dusty's neck. The mule pushed her nose against his chest. Still here. He looked at Ayana. You're welcome. Take care of your sister. Nishoba watched this exchange with an expression that might have been approval, might have been something deeper. Tell me, Kalen Merritt, what do you want in return for this service? Kalen looked at Nishoba, at the warriors surrounding them, at the two sisters who had nearly died that morning. What did he want? The question felt like a test, like there was a right answer, and several wrong ones. He thought about his property, his empty shed, the winter coming, and no money to prepare for it. The meal he'd gotten back was worth something, but not enough. Nothing. Ken said, I don't want anything. Nishoba's eyebrows raised slightly. Nothing. You give up your most valuable possession. Risk your life facing dangerous men and want nothing in return. I want your daughters to be safe. That's all along. Silence. The warriors exchanged glances. Ayana watched Ken with an expression that was hard to read. Nishoba stepped closer. Most men who help others expect payment, gratitude at minimum. Recognition. You expect neither. I expect you to take care of your family and to make sure those men down in the ravine never hurt anyone else. Nishoba nodded slowly. The men in the ravine. Yes, they will be dealt with. My warriors have them secured. They will face justice for what they have done. Not just to my daughters, to others they have taken. There was something dark in his voice now, something that suggested the slaver's fate was already decided, and it wasn't merciful. Ken felt he should probably feel bad about that. He didn't. Men who bought and sold human beings deserved whatever they got. He looked at the sun lower now, maybe 2 hours until sunset. Before the sun sets, Nishoba had said earlier they'd made it, found the daughters alive. The deadline had been met. Nishoba seemed to read his thoughts. You're wondering if you are free to go now, am I? Yes. You may return to your property. Take your animal. Go back to your life. The leader paused, but I would ask something of you first. What? Come back to the ravine. With us, stand witness to what happens to those men. I want them to see the face of the one person who acted with honor today. I want them to understand that they failed because one man chose differently than they would have. Kalen wasn't sure he wanted to see what Apache justice looked like, but he also understood what Nishoba was offering. Not just revenge, a message, a statement that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequence. He nodded. Oh, come. They rode back together, slower this time, less urgency. Two warriors stayed behind with Kay to continue treating her wounds. Ayana rode with her father sitting close, her head occasionally resting against his shoulder. Kalen rode beside them, leading Dusty, the afternoon light turned everything gold and red, beautiful, deceptive, the kind of light that made terrible things look like paintings. When they reached the ravine, the 5 slavers were on their knees in the dirt, hands bound behind them, surrounded by a circle of warriors with weapons drawn. The scarred leader saw Neshoba return, saw Kalen beside him. His expression went from afraid to something worse than afraid, understanding they'd lost completely. Neshoba dismounted, walked into the circle, stood before the 5 men. "My daughters are alive," he said, his voice carried across the ravine. "No thanks to you. They are wounded, but they will heal. They are safe now, and you will ensure that no others suffer what you intended for them." The scarred man tried to speak, and Shoba cut him off with a gesture. "You'll be taken to the territorial marshal. You'll testify against everyone involved in your trade. Every buyer, every seller, every corrupt agent who enables this evil. And if you refuse, my warriors will ensure you regret that choice for however long you continue breathing." One or the other. Slavers broke, started talking immediately. Names, locations, routes. Everything spilling out in a desperate attempt to bargain for mercy. The scarred man glared at him, called him a coward, but the damage was done. The network was exposed. Neshoba listened, memorized every detail. Then he turned to his warriors. "Take them, deliver them, and their confessions to the marshal. Make certain justice is served." The warriors moved efficiently. Within minutes, the 5 slavers were mounted on horses, still bound, being led away by armed escort, their fates sealed by their own words. Neshoba watched them go. Then he turned to Ken. "This is what you helped prevent. My daughters enslaved to men like that, sold like animals, used and discarded. You stopped that. Whatever you think you did this morning, understand it was more significant than you know." Callan looked at the empty ravine, the shadows growing longer. "I just gave them a mule. You gave them hope. You gave them a chance. In a world where most would have looked away, you chose to see, to act. That is not common. That is not small." The sun touched the horizon as Neshoba and Kalen stood at the edge of the ravine. The warriors had departed with their prisoners. The blood in the dirt was already drying. Soon there would be no evidence that anything had happened. Here, just another empty space in the frontier, but both men knew different. "You still refuse payment," Neshoba said. "It wasn't quite a question. I have my mule back. That's enough." Neshoba shook his head slowly. "It is not enough. You risked everything, your property, your future, your life for strangers. There must be balance." Kalen looked at Dusty, standing patient nearby. "The balance is that your daughters are alive. That's what matters." And Shobo was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into a pouch at his belt, pulled out something small, extended his hand to Ken. In his palm lay a carved stone, smooth, ancient, simple designs etched into its surface. "This belonged to my grandfather," Neshoba said, "and his grandfather before him. It marks the bearer as a friend to our people, someone who can travel our land safely. Someone we trust." Kalen stared at the stone. "That's too valuable." Value is determined by what something represents. This represents debt paid and honor recognized. "Take it." Kalen took the stone. It was warm from Neshoba's hand, heavier than it looked. He closed his fingers around it. "Thank you." "There's something else." Neshoba gestured toward the north. "My people camped 3 miles that direction." Ayana insisted. "I tell you this," she says, "if you ever need assistance, shelter, food, anything, you come to us. You will always be welcome." Always. Kalen felt something tight in his chest, the kind of emotion that doesn't have a name. "I'll remember that." "See that you do." Neshoba extended his hand, not in the formal ceremonial way from before, just one man to another. Kalen shook it. The grip was firm, brief, meaningful. "Your daughters," Kalen said. "Will they be all right?" "Kimmy will need time to heal, weeks perhaps, but she is young, strong. She will recover. Ayana is tougher than she appears. She has already asked when she can resume her training." And Shoba's expression softens slightly, almost a smile. "They are survivors like their father, like the man who saved them." "I didn't save them. I just gave them a chance. That is what's saving someone." means giving them a chance when they have none left. Neshoba stepped back, raised his hand in farewell. May your path be clear, Kalen Merritt, and yours. Neshoba, the Apache leader, mounted his horse, rode north without looking back. Within minutes, he was a silhouette against the darkening sky. Then nothing, just empty land and the sound of wind. Moving through the ravine, Callan stood there alone, feeling the weight of the carved stone in his hand, the weight of a day that had changed everything. He mounted Dusty, turned her toward home. The ride back was slow, peaceful. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with cold light. When he reached his property, the barn door was still open. Where the slavers had kicked it in, the shed still showed signs of the morning's chaos. But it was his, still standing. Still home. He put Dusty in the corral with the other 2 mules, fed them all, checked their water, the simple familiar. Tasks felt different now, more significant. He had almost lost everything, but he had made a choice, the right choice, and somehow, impossibly, everything had worked out. Inside his small house, Kalen placed the carved stone on the table, looked at it in the lamplight, a piece of someone else's history. Now, part of his, he thought about Ayana and Cam, about Neshoba, about 5 men who would face justice for their crimes, about a morning that had started with blood in the dirt and ended with something resembling peace. He had given up his best mule so 2 Apache sisters could escape. Their father had arrived before sunset, and instead of death or punishment or loss, Kalen had discovered something unexpected, that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, sometimes returns more than it takes, not in gold or land or livestock, but in something harder to measure and impossible to purchase. Respect, trust, the knowledge that when the moment came, when the choice had to be made, he had chosen to see other people as human beings worth saving. Callan extinguished the lamp, lay down. To sleep, outside, Dusty made a soft sound in the corral, content safe. Home. And for the first time in years, Kayla Merritt felt like he was part of something larger than his small piece of land, part of a world where honor still meant something, where choices mattered, where one man's courage could change the course of lives. The frontier was hard, unforgiving, dangerous, but it was also full of moments like this, moments that prove humanity could survive even in the harshest places. Even when everything else was stripped away, people could still choose kindness, could still choose to help, could still choose to be better than their fears. And that Ken thought asleep took him was worth more than any mule, worth more than anything. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another tale from the frontier, where courage and sacrifice shape destinies in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more stories like these.